You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and it's that time of the week once again to take a look at the UFL, all 8 teams, rank them from worst to first. I'll give my full reasoning as to why, so I invite you all to do the same in the comments section down below. Let me know, where are you putting all 8 teams from top to bottom? How do you feel about this past weekend of games? How are you thinking so far as we reach the midpoint of the UFL season? We're heading into week number 5 now. So once we wrap up this next week, we are officially halfway done the year and halfway en route to the UFL playoffs. So fire away in the comment section down below. I'll dive right in, starting with the team that I have at the very bottom. And this one might be a little bit of a controversial one here, but it's one that I'm feeling pretty firm about just based off the performance from the last couple of weeks and even extending into week number 2. And that's going to be the Memphis Showboats here. Yes, the team that is 0-4 in the UFL is not the worst team in the league, in my opinion. And here is my reasoning as to why. Losing 32-17 this past week, since week 2, that massive defensive collapse to the San Antonio Brahmas, Memphis has severely underperformed and has been downright demolished since that fourth quarter here. If it was not for running back Darius Victor finding some massive holes late in the second quarter to help lead a scoring drive, this game honestly looks significantly worse than it already does. You finished the day with a mere 127 yards of offense, averaging just 3.3 yards per play. You had one lone third down conversion, failing twice on fourth down on top of it. It felt like Case Cookus was just a rag doll out there for the majority of the game, so much so that once the game finally got out of hand, you basically threw Trey Williams to the Wolves to try to preserve Case Cookus because he was taking a literal beating. I am not sure where this offense goes following what just happened this past weekend, because when you think of the opponent and some of the defensive issues that St. Louis has had so far this season, for them to come in and look like one of the most dominant defenses in the UFL in the second half against Memphis, I legitimately do not know how to make sense of what's going on right now over in Memphis on the offensive side. And defensively, this is where I really justify this whole bottom of the UFL right now. Is it just feels like this team defensively has fallen off, but can't fully play 60 minutes of football for whatever the reasoning may be. Since that fourth quarter against the Brahmas, they have allowed 7 touchdowns in the fourth quarter from that fourth quarter against San Antonio going through their next couple of games. I understand that Arlington is, again, 0-4. They're the only winless team right now, but they have been very competitive in pretty much all of their losses, minus the first game of the season, if you want to say that. But when you look at Memphis and where they currently are right now, since that fourth quarter, because that's where you have to go back to this entire collapse beginning, since that fourth quarter against San Antonio, they have been outscored 85-31, both offensively and defensively. It feels like the life and soul was ripped out of them following that loss to San Antonio, and I don't quite have the answer as to what's going on, but something needs to change going forward in the second half of the season. It's got to start in week number 5. If they have any hopes of trying to make a surprise late run into the playoffs, it's got to turn around going into week number 5. But based off everything I've seen these last couple of weeks, I don't quite know if they can do it. Moving into number 7, here is where the UFL's lone winless team will fall in my rankings here, falling 17-9. At this point, the way I look at Arlington is they just cannot seem to get out of their own way in certain spots, whether it's offensively or defensively now, because for the last few weeks, everyone's really been dialed in on that defense, myself included, and just all the mistakes they've made. But finally, the defense has itself a pretty strong game, and then ultimately the offense is the one making the costly mistakes, the inefficiency on offense just as a whole, and the mental errors that are costing you a football game, whereas the offense has been your strength going through the first 3 3 weeks of the season. You had the interception in the first quarter early to kind of rattle things out. The turnover on downs in the second quarter is where you're really starting to see where this offense just kind of begin to unravel. And then ultimately the fumble in the fourth quarter to essentially throw away an opportunity at tying up the football game. It's unfortunate because this was the best game that the Arlington Renegades defense has had all season long, and just a devastating way to go down when your defense finally is able to put it together for 4 quarters and help you big time. You held Houston, to only 17 points. You had big performances from guys like Donald Payne, Tenny Adewusi, Jalen Redmond. There were some big plays being made on the defensive side of the football, and it all kind of goes to a waste. So I looked at this game kind of like a gotta have it type of moment, but you come up short. You're 0-4 now. They didn't have it, and you fall to being the only team without a win so far this season. But do I think that they're worse than Memphis? Honestly, no. I would trust Arlington's offense going head-to-head against Memphis more than I would Memphis's offense. And on top of that, the defense in Memphis, which looked strong to start off the season, has kind of fallen off itself, and it's a battle of basically whose defense winds up being worse. I think I'd take Arlington in a head-to-head matchup here, so I like Arlington by a hair. It's not by very much, by a hair, but I don't think even at 0-4, Arlington is the worst team in the UFL. Crazy enough. Moving into the number 6 spot, we are looking at the team that just defeated the Arlington Renegades to avoid being the only team in the UFL without a win this season. A massive defensive effort leading to their first victory. Cornerback Keandre Thomas, he set the tone early with an interception at the 8-yard line in the first quarter, and then poetically enough, the defense again making plays when it matters most. It concludes basically with defensive end Chris Odom making a massive strip sack to save the game and thwart Arlington's comeback attempt late in the fourth quarter there. You forced Luis Perez into what was arguably his worst game of the season so far. You held the league's best passing attack, statistically speaking, to only 153 yards of offense through the air. That is fantastic numbers there defensively. And on the offensive side, while it wasn't by any means some explosive effort, the defense is so great that if you just get some good offensive play where you're not really throwing the game away, you have yourself a shot. And the return of running back Mark Thompson was a good shot in the leg for this team here. His performance altogether, statistically speaking, not going to really blow anyone away. But when you look at what he did, the spark that he brought to this offense, ultimately leading to a score for himself, which no surprise there. This dude is a touchdown machine, so I was not surprised to see him make his UFL season debut and ultimately score a touchdown in the same matchup. That is just kind of Mark Thompson's MO. Stats are not always pretty, but one thing you can seem to count on is Mark Thompson finding the end zone. You also had yourself a pretty good performance from quarterback Reed Sinnett as well. 18 of 28, 191 yards, a touchdown, a few runs here and there as well. But overall, this was a step in the right direction for a team that has just offensively been kind of dead in the water. Your defense had a really tough game last week, and there was some concern that, maybe like the floodgates had finally opened after the first few weeks of hanging in there strong, but bounce back for the defense. The offense finally finds some success, and now you can kind of look towards, taking it 1 week at a time, maybe put together a couple of wins in a row, maybe 3 in a row, depending on how Mark Thompson continues to reintegrate himself into the offense. There's a lot to look forward to. And the way I kind of see this week for Houston, it was almost like getting 2 wins in one, because again, you get your win over the Arlington Renegades, your second win being you're not the only winless team in the league. Coming in at number 5 here, and this one's a big one because this is a steep drop for this team here. I had them all the way at number 2 last week, but my oh my, how the mighty can fall at times. We're looking at the Michigan Panthers here, dropping down to 2-2 in a 19-9 loss, and man, just what the hell happened was kind of my takeaway from this matchup here. Last week, I'm crowning the Michigan Panthers a rival and, letting everyone know this is a team to worry about and, a team that can threaten just about anybody. But I did make sure I added that everything needs to go well for that to be the case. And we clearly saw that not be the case this week. And you look no further than the offensive line troubles of this team that have popped up once again, and it continues to be a problem. And this has been something that's kind of stemmed in Michigan for more than just this season as well. If you're somebody who's followed the USFL for quite some time now, prior to this merger that we have now, the offensive line has not necessarily been stellar by any means in Michigan for the last few years. And 6 sacks allowed, coupled with 6 stops from behind the line to scrimmage as well. San Antonio's defensive front was just eating them alive, and it was very clearly a mismatch going throughout this one here, to the point so much so where EJ Perry winds up taking so many hits, he goes down with an injury. Danny Etling comes in. He brings a little bit of a spark to the offense late in the fourth quarter. He hooked up with Marcus Sims, who continues to show that he is one of the best, if not the best, deep threat in the UFL right now, with a 41-yard touchdown reception late in the fourth quarter. Didn't ultimately change too much for it, but it did happen. I definitely think it's worth mentioning. Shout out to Marcus Sims. At this point, it seems like he's averaging 55 yards a catch almost. The number's ludicrously high. I would not be shocked if, based off that touchdown catch alone, the number is still hovering somewhere within the 20s, because it was in the 20s last week. So go check out the exact number. I don't know what it is, but I know it's somewhere in the 20s. Defensively, this is tough, because this was kind of looking like one of the strengths for this team over the last few weeks, and now it's kind of starting to unravel here. And I don't know if it's just because the offense is really hurting them and they're spending too much time on the football field, because that is always something you can look at. When a strength like defensive play or just being really good at one thing or another starts to kind of fade, you almost want to look at what's the reasoning behind it. And sometimes just the lack of offensive efficiency and being on the football field too much for the defense is where those things can start to unravel. It's not just as simple as, oh, it's these players not stepping up to where they need to be. It's a little bit deeper than that at times. And I mean, no matter what they did to stop them from running the football, it did not matter, because Quentin Dormady had himself a monster, season debut, or not. When did Chase Gard? Season debut, Quentin Dormady, 11.5 yards per completion. It did not matter. Your secondary, your entire defense, when it came to defending the pass, looked like Swiss cheese going up against what San Antonio was doing here. And again, you held San Antonio to 1.9 yards per attempt on the ground. It did not matter. And to me, that is concerning, because now you're talking about severe O-line issues, the defense starting to collapse a little bit because of just the poor offensive play as well. They're spending way too much time on the football field. And now you're just like, you're compounding the issues and worries. And I thought that maybe these issues were sorted out, because week 1, it did not look great for the O-line, did not look great going up against Birmingham either as well. And then it felt like maybe they kind of figured it out, but then in comes week 4 and it's a glaring issue once again. And now you're not only worrying about your offensive line, but you're also worrying about the quarterback position as well, because how far can this team go with Danny Etling at the helm? I don't really know. How long is EJ Perry going to be out if he has to miss significant time? I don't know. We're going to get the answers to that hopefully sooner rather than later. But you go from feeling like a team that could legitimately compete for a playoff spot and for a potential shot at the UFL's championship, and now we're talking about injury at the quarterback. The offensive line is back to just completely being a sand sieve, and your secondary overall just was not able to stop what Quentin Dormady was doing. So there's a lot of concerns that are just all of a sudden piling up, and it's only been 1 week since everyone was really up on the Michigan Panthers. So we'll see what happens there. I have them just outside the top 4, but a little bit concerned from what we just saw this past week. Moving into the top half of the UFL, though, sitting at 2-2 as well, coming off of a very, very tight loss, and one that I think was a lot tighter than anyone was anticipating, myself included on that, is going to be the DC Defenders, losing 20-18 to the defending USFL champions, the Birmingham Stallions. Credit where it's due. This game was close. DC took advantage of opportunities that presented themselves during this matchup here and took the league's best, and I would say consensus league's best, down to the very last seconds of the football game. At this point, when I look at them offensively, the running game is very clearly struggling to figure out how to sort themselves out, minus Abram Smith, which is really unfortunate, because I do think he was going to be a big piece of this offense here and was supposed to really open things up. But then you look at Jordan Teamu, and he's very much boom or bust with his play. I mean, he's tied for second in the UFL right now in passing touchdowns with 6, but he's also sitting at a 52% completion percentage, which is literally the worst in the UFL out of anyone who's taken snaps at the quarterback position. So there is definitely some cause for concern there. It just feels like it's very 50-50, and even with his completion percentage being 52%, like that's not even supposed to be a pun. Like it's very fair 50-50 with how this offense works. And I just feel like these inconsistencies kind of worry me about this team as a whole, but they have been competitive. So there is that to go with it. Sometimes, a team will just have that it factor despite inconsistencies that allow them to hang in there. And I think we saw a lot of that coming from this team in what was a far closer than anticipated matchup with the Birmingham Stallions. On the defensive side, I think I want to give them praise because, again, you held Birmingham to only 20 points, and you did a great job of capitalizing on mistakes that kind of jumped out in front of you, and you did all you could to take advantage of those big mistakes here. And you brought up a ton of pressure up front. You had 4 sacks on the evening. I mean, it was a good performance, but I wouldn't go as far as to say it was a great performance. And a good performance in that they just did a great job of taking advantage of Birmingham's miscues and mental errors. When you look at the numbers at the end of the game here, we're looking at 356 yards of total offense allowed. And this goes back to DC having one of the worst defenses in the UFL right now. You were a couple of mental errors with those, messed up handoffs, whatever they were supposed to be in those first couple of drives that wound up being fumbles that DC ultimately recovered, and a dropped touchdown away from Kevin Austin late in this game, which would have given Birmingham a go-ahead touchdown as opposed to having to settle for a field goal to win, from this game potentially being like 41 to 18. So again, I don't want to take away from DC being able to play the defending champions the way they did at this point. This kind of feels like a game within the football game itself, but it's like who can bring the best fight to the Birmingham Stallions right now. You brought the best fight in terms of scoreboard and final numbers, but you still have to be a little bit concerned about this defense and just how much they allow, because if those, again, it's not like you forced the fumbles. It was literally just whether it was miscommunication, a case of Butterfingers, whatever it may have been on those first couple of fumbles. And if Kevin Austin hauls in that touchdown, like, we're talking a very different football game and having a very different conversation. But they took advantage of the mistakes where they did, credit where it's due. But I'm very unsure about this DC Defenders team. Like, they're 2-2, and I don't really know what to make of them right now. Moving into the number 3 spot here, moving back up into the top half of the UFL, I'm looking at the San Antonio Brahmas with their 19-9 victory here. I got a couple of apologies I need to make. Firstly, to San Antonio, because I was a little bit concerned about them coming out of their loss last week, where I thought, maybe there was a chance that we were seeing a little bit of fraudulent activity being revealed, where this team might not have been as good as some people anticipated or maybe thought so far to that point in the season. But I also need to apologize to quarterback Quinton Dormady. I was not familiar with how good your game apparently is, and that is on me. I was genuinely concerned about what this offense was going to look like minus Chase Garbers. I picked against them in the game. I ended up eating my concerns and then some because of the way this game ended up going, because Dormady stepped in and led a devastating passing attack against Michigan. San Antonio finished the game with 2 100-yard wide receivers in Jontre Kirkland and Justin Smith, the first of this season. It was not a great performance running the football, but I mean, if you have Dormady just slicing and dicing the opposing defense the way he was, he didn't really get pressured too often. Again, you're basically just throwing the football at will, getting away with whatever you want. It's okay. The running game has not really been super impressive in San Antonio this season, barring like a good performance last week. But overall, a lot of the concerns I had going into this week were quelled. I was a little bit nervous about the defense and what we saw from them last week, and I thought, maybe we saw like the reality of what this defense is as opposed to the first 2 really good weeks. But you look at the way they were this past week, and they were a literal nightmare for Michigan's offense here. And knowing who Wade Phillips is as a coach, being a guy that has spent so much time in the NFL, and for me, I'm an NFL guy. I love the NFL, and it's what I follow mostly. Knowing who Wade Phillips is and the way his defenses has worked, I'm really not surprised he's getting so much out of all of these guys. You had 6 different players notch 6 sacks in total. You had 6 different or I guess I should say a singular sack to total 6. And then you had 6 different players also notch a tackle for loss, totaling for 6 on the evening. Like there's so much going on up front on this defense, and it's very clearly overwhelming some of these offenses and offensive lines in particular. And it's not really too surprising. You couple that with the fact that, on 3rd down, this team was a nightmare. You allowed 2 conversions on 11 attempts. I believe they 0 for 2 on 4th down as well. If this is what San Antonio is going to be defensively, we now have 3 out of 4 games where they've had excellent performances, especially up front, combined with Quinton Dormady coming in and potentially being as good as, and because there's a cult-like fan base, I feel like, surrounding Dormady. Like when I saw the Chase Garbers news, I also saw a lot of people, basically chanting on, it's Dormady time. And again, I'm not too familiar with his game, so that's on me. But seeing what he was able to do combined with the defense bouncing back this week, this is a threatening team in the UFL, and I really hope that's not the kiss of death it turns into, because I said that about the Panthers last week, but I'm a little bit more confident in saying that this week about the Brahmas having 4 weeks of games to look at here with 3 really strong performances and a game that, was a little bit rocky, but overall 3-1. They're looking really good. They're as hot as just about anyone in the UFL right now. Really excited to see how this team shapes up the next few weeks. Going into number 2, lot of consideration following this past week. Who should I have at number 2? Who should I have at number 1? I will say it was not as clear cut and dry as just go with who I've had at 1 and, move in this new team into number 2 or, this and that. There was a lot of consideration that went into it. However, I did settle with the St. Louis Battlehawks as my number 2 team. On a 3-game heater right now, it is definitely time to give them the respect that is due. And I know some people have looked at them a little bit more highly than I have over the last few weeks, and I will, be more than willing to admit that. But I think for me, what really justifies this and also puts this team over the top now is wide receiver Ja'Cour Pearson. He made sure everyone was aware that he was on the football field and that he is back. 10 receptions, 74 yards, a touchdown catch. One of his catches went for like 24 yards or something like that. You now have this 3-headed monster of receivers in Hakeem Butler, Darius Shepard, and now Ja'Cour Pearson. Good luck to all the secondaries trying to defend these guys going forward. And on top of that, running back Jacob Sailors put together another really good week, 103 yards on the ground, averaging 7 yards per attempt. He had a receiving touchdown as well. A.J. McCarron went for nearly 80% completion this past week, 222 yards. He had 3 touchdowns. This is quite possibly the best offense in the UFL right now. I know the Birmingham Stallions had themselves a wild week number 3, and that it was a lot to take in, but they're playing hot potato with quarterback despite what Adrian Martinez and the offense did last week. So, that is something that you have to bear in mind. A.J. McCarron's the guy over here. You have just a litany of pass catchers to throw the football to. And on top of that, you have 2 running backs now who have looked really good in the last 3 weeks of play. This offense feels very complete, very trustworthy. And with A.J. McCarron leading the way, championship caliber offense. Defensively, been a bit of an up and down endeavor for this team so far this season. I feel like we've gotten 2 good weeks, 2 bad weeks. And so I'm very 50-50 on what the defense is. However, in week number 4, this was a great time to have a really big game and to force your opponent into just 127 total yards of offense. We're looking at 60 yards passing, 67 rushing, ludicrous numbers if you ask me for 60 minutes of football. You shut your opponents out in the second half. You had 4 sacks, you had a couple of takeaways. This was by far the most complete game of the season, in my opinion, for the St. Louis Battlehawks here. And honestly, if they clean up like a mistake or 2, yes, they won their game, 32-17, but that very easily could have been a situation where it's like 39-10, something like that. We're talking a missed field goal and an interception away from this game being really out of hand, and it was already fairly out of hand by the time it was all said and done. But I look at the Battlehawks as the lone true threat to the Birmingham Stallions right now based off of these first 4 weeks. And then, of course, at the number 1 spot, the Birmingham Stallions. And I want to make it clear that I seriously sat down and thought about making St. Louis number 1 because of just how complete they looked. And I'm really not a big fan of this hot potato 2 quarterback system thing. This is something I go back to like the early first season of the USFL, and we were getting this with the New Jersey Generals here. I do not like the hot potato, one hand, let's go with the next one. Pick a quarterback and stick with it. And I understand why Skip Holtz is doing it. I don't need anyone to yell at me about that. I understand why. He wants to give both his quarterbacks opportunities to put on game tape and showcase what they're able to do. I totally understand why. It's a spring football league. It's a league of opportunity. But as a football purist, I want to see the best product on the field as possible every single week. I want the best out there. And after watching what Birmingham did last week offensively, it almost felt like a crime to not see Adrian Martinez not get the start this week. So I was a little upset about it. And those first 3 drives were a bit of a Birmingham nightmare. I will say that. You're talking about a couple of whatever it was, miscommunications or just whatever it was, a very severe situation of we can't handle handing off the football, which is probably something they're going to spend all week doing in practice. And then on top of that, that 3rd drive ended with the blocked punt. Like, there was a lot to be worried about early on in this game here. Again, a lot of mental errors and mistakes that allowed DC to keep this game a lot closer than I really think it should have been. once all that was kind of sorted out, though, and, the fumbles and all that, you dealt with that, things at least settled and it got a little bit prettier. You had a weird instance in the third quarter going into the fourth. I don't remember exactly when, but you went 3 straight 3-and-out drives. The offense felt discombobulated. Of course, this is after the weather delay, and it was not a great day in terms of weather for football, and I totally get that. But this by no means was a pretty Birmingham Stallions win, and that's definitely worth pointing out and mentioning here. I do want to shout out kicker Ramiz Ahmed for his 4 field goals, including the game winner, probably team MVP from this past week. And even some of the defense just felt really off. You weren't really able to bring a ton of pressure. Jordan Teamu had a couple of touchdown passes. I think he had a better game than I was anticipating. And I think a few other people were anticipating as well. And again, you can look at this whole thing and blame the weather, whatever you want to do. I'm not going to sit here and make excuses for them. I feel like, playing in odd weather comes with the territory of football, especially in spring football. It's the rainy season right now at pretty much everywhere. So you're bound to get the type of stuff. So you have to be somewhat prepared for it. But despite the struggles and the unprettiness of this game, I also think it's worth mentioning that with this situation being the way it was, where you have a team coming in that I'm pretty sure just about everyone picked against. I think everyone had Birmingham going over DC. To find yourself in a situation where you're down in the waning literal seconds of the football game, to come up big, knock in a field goal to steal the lead with 4 seconds left on the clock, that's championship team caliber stuff right there. When the pressure is on, and it's on as high as it possibly can be right now with Birmingham, because they're on some ridiculous winning streak right now. I think of 11 games now, 12 games, whatever it may be, stemming back to last season. The pressure's on. And when you perform under these types of circumstances and it's not pretty, to see you still come out victorious is huge. It's a massive confidence boost. I don't know what they're going to keep doing with the quarterback situation. Selfishly, because I would love to see a three-peat from Birmingham at this point, I want to see them settle on a quarterback. But if they're going to keep doing this back and forth type of game and they're still winning football, I feel like it just accentuates how good this football team is. But enough of that. We'll stop, tooting the horn of the Birmingham Stallions here. I am not a Birmingham Stallions fan either, by the way. I'm rooting for the Houston Roughnecks, and what are they, 6 right now? So that's where I stand. But you have to, recognize the greatness where it is. But as I was saying, that is it for me. Comment down below. Let me hear your power rankings. Do you agree or disagree with mine? Would love to discuss with you all. But as always, if you took the time to make it to the very end, I greatly appreciate it. I will see you all next time. And I've got a big announcement coming up soon. So if you stayed to see that, be keeping those eyes peeled. Have a good one.